Ngā mihi nui kia koutou from New Zealand. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the land, from the long white cloud to the red rock. And I just want to say how beautiful this town is. It was lovely walking around the middle of the town the other day when I first arrived here, and it was just wonderful to see all the different people and the different richness of this land. This is my first Paccoa conference, and I'd just like to thank the Paccoa people for inviting me here. It was a really wonderful event over the last day, just kind of being with people and celebrating what we do. And as you know, I've been in the business for a number of years, so it's great to see what happens internationally and in Australia. Okay, so in my presentation I will try and briefly cover what has been happening in corrections in New Zealand for over the past 5 to 6 years, with particular emphasis on the community probation practice. I will give a brief overview of the Community Probation Change Program, the restructure in September 2012, moving towards the one-team approach, and some of the wonderful initiatives and innovations that are taking place in New Zealand. For some of you, I've put some pamphlets on your tables. I should have brought more. I didn't realise there were so many people, and I should have brought some pens. A bit of bribery always helps. But it's quite difficult to probably talk briefly about the Community Probation Change Program because it has changed the way we do things significantly in New Zealand. So just a brief history. Around 1995 and prior to that, probation officers have a certain degree of autonomy. There was no standardised training, and many of the probation officers worked with offenders, but they brought their own skills and their own knowledge to the job. Then there were a number of failings and a number of issues that happened in the New Zealand context, and we moved to what I call a more compliance-focused model of practice. So we were very focused on the sentence and orders, on risk obviously, which is very important, but a one-size-fits-all approach was how we dealt with things, and we worked on a rules-based and compliance model. In 2009 our world changed quite significantly, and we implemented what we call the Integrated Practice Framework. There was a big emphasis on creating lasting change with a clear purpose and direction and outcomes. With most probation officers within that time, if you ask them, what do you do? People knew that they worked to make the place a lot safer and manage risks, but we didn't have a clear purpose, and I think that was quite a fundamental shift in terms of how we viewed ourselves. We created a purpose, and that was to contribute to safer communities by holding offenders to account and managing them to comply with their sentences and orders to reduce the likelihood of reoffending and minimising the harm to others. So we changed our practice to be more about focusing on the offender, not the sentence. We managed to risk, not the sent or order type. The other thing we did was we developed a clear assessment process. It guided our thinking and enabled us to identify specific factors in a much more individual way with each offender. It was more strengths-based, so when I heard someone talking about being more strengths-based and the Good Lives model, that's kind of what we're doing at the moment. We tried to build protective factors with the goal of desistance, so the prolonged abstinence from criminal activity. And when someone yesterday talked about protective factors and risk needs and responsivity, that actually underpins our practice, but we've moved more towards what we call a DRAOR assessment tool that we utilise through our practice. And what that does is it assesses 6 stable factors, 7 acute factors, and focuses on protective factors as well. These protective factors include pro-social support, control and advice, as well as having high expectations of success. By identifying both the protective factors and the lack of them, we can help the offender build up specific internal and external protectors to reduce the likelihood of reoffending. The other thing that we did, and this is just kind of a brief overview, and it took years for all of this to happen, was we implemented what we called the Practice Leadership Framework. So within probation, we have a number of practice leaders that work in our sites and our service centres, and they're the holders of our practice. So our Practice Leadership Framework, it defines what professional practice and probation is. It sets expectations of staff and outlines what they can expect to enable them to become professional practitioners. At the heart of the framework is what we call he raranga hau, and that's a Māori term for the new weave. And what he raranga hau is an approach that ensures that all our practice is effective, especially with Māori offenders, their whānau and community. So I suppose what we've tried to do is weave working with Māori effectively within the practice so that it's not just for individual people, but every person within probation can work in a way that is effective not only for Māori but all other offenders in New Zealand. So this approach enables us to create new behaviours in offenders that lead to new lives that are offence-free. The Practice Leadership Framework makes it clear everyone leads on practice. It has a responsibility, and everyone has a responsibility for their own development. There is also a practice leadership team, and we have a chief probation officer that's based in our national office in Wellington that actually is the holder and keeper of our practice. They help develop professional practice, develop guidelines for us, support our training and any other practice that's important for us in the field. What happened at the end of 2012 was, because of the change program that had been implemented within New Zealand, we actually won the IPCA 2012 award in Mexico. So some lucky person was able to go to Mexico to get that award. But that was quite a significant undertaking from a little place in New Zealand, and I know I haven't done justice to kind of the practice leadership model that we've implemented, but that's a brief overview of the Community Probation Change Program. So whilst that was happening and we were bedding in our practice, we also had a new chief executive and a big push towards unifying our efforts. So we had a restructure, and I'll briefly try and describe what we looked like prior to the restructure. So we had our service delivery arms, so we had our prisons and we had our community probation, and then overlapping that we had people that were involved in the reintegration and rehabilitation, so developing all our programs and initiatives. Each entity was performing really well in its own right. However, we needed to transform the way that we worked. So what our chief executive did was he created 4 regions. Previously there were 3. He removed one layer, that was the regional manager layer, to remove the silos that had been created over the years. So what that meant was that our regional managers became operational managers, and he created one regional commissioner. So we have 4 regional commissioners in New Zealand, and every person within the service delivery arms actually reports to that person. So what that means is that regionally we have set up new teams. These teams cover the whole spectrum of corrections, both the prison and community. We also have district teams, so those same people that work for prisons, probation, rehabilitation and reintegration all work together in each site and in each service centre, making decisions for the district and for the region. That was a fundamental transformation of what we did, and it moved towards the one team approach. It's quite a simplistic description of it, but sometimes in simplicity, real change is created. So one of the ways that brought us all together, believing that we were one team, is creating a vision. And what that vision was reducing reoffending by 25% by 2017. So that was our one team approach, and whilst we did that, we also had a creating lasting change strategic vision for 1 to 5 years, and a better public service vision from our Prime Minister, which was about bringing people together collectively across all sectors to address reoffending as one of the particular areas of concern. I put some stuff on your tables. I haven't got much, but there is one around better public services, and it just gives you an example of one of the innovations that is happening in New Zealand. So with that approach, if you have a look at that presentation or the pamphlet, what you'll see down below is a number of government organisations working together to create lasting change in the lives of offenders. All of us have our different targets, but what it does is it brings us together for a common purpose. And I suppose that permeates through what I was talking about when I talked about one team approach, is that to galvanise us, we needed one vision. So we all work together for that vision in our different ways, combining our efforts to make a real difference in our community. Okay, so with that you need key priorities, and in our strategic vision we have 4 priorities. One of them is improving public safety, reducing reoffending and better public value plus visible leadership. In one of those booklets in there it gives a better description of those priorities and what that means for us as a department and as New Zealanders. But just going through improving public safety, some of the additional things that we're doing is using technology. So we use GPS technology to oversee offenders. That's been proving very effective. We also work more collaboratively with police and intel so that those people that are causing the most harm, we're talking and communicating with each other. There's a big push around reducing reoffending, like everything. We have world-renowned programs that are effective and working. On the front of one of those pamphlets is our website. There's significant works and research on what's effective and what is working for us in New Zealand. Our big focus at the moment is alcohol and drug, and I'll briefly describe some of the interventions and new trainings that probation officers are receiving in New Zealand. There's obviously a push for better public value, like everywhere. We want to save money. So how they do that is actually looking at different government organisations and ourselves to see how we can work more effectively and more efficiently together. We can't do anything without visible leadership and without leadership, so it's important for all of us in the organisation, from our community work supervisors to our probation officers to everyone that works in there, to actually give leadership and be talking about how we can reduce reoffending and make a difference in the community. So just some facts about our offenders, and when I listen to much of what's been said over the last day and a half, I mean, it's pretty similar. So this is not just for New Zealand, obviously it happens all around the world, but the majority of our offenders are in the community, so 82% are being managed by our probation staff. 80% are males, 94% of prisoners are male. Under 35, 63% of community offenders, 54% of prisoners, and many have drug problems and alcohol problems, and many are unemployed. There's a huge literacy and numeracy issues within New Zealand as well. And 23,000 children in New Zealand have a parent in prison, and they're 7 times more likely to end up in prison. And some pluses though, community work provides 3 million hours of labour each year. And at the moment, GPS is relatively new technology, but we have 109 offenders, and it's increasing. And there's been some interesting findings from GPS in terms of tracking where some of our child sex offenders are actually going. It doesn't tell us what they're doing, but it is interesting in terms of where they're going and how often they're standing in different places. And whether those places are near parks, etc. But there's been some interesting facts from that. In New Zealand, we, community probation, manage 9 sentences and orders. 3 of those are electronic, and we've just taken over EM bail. Here are some other facts, if you just want to briefly read through those. There is a big focus now on looking at other ways or different partners. That also is probably for the probation side one thing that I know our Chief Executive has been looking at, other ways that we can do things better and partner up with other people and organisations. Okay, so what we know, and we do know a lot of things, is that people with education and training who are in work are less likely to offend. So it was interesting when the Minister was talking, because he was kind of talking the language that is being taught about in New Zealand. But there is a real focus for us as community probation to not only manage their sentences and orders, not only reduce their reoffending and look at the factors that lead to offending, but also to look at education, training, and look at work options. And that was something previously we may not have been as good at doing as we should have been. But working with prisons and the stuff that they're doing in terms of reintegration and release to work projects has been really beneficial. The other huge push for us is engaging with whānau to change behaviour and reintegration to the community. And whānau is family. Now, there's a significant number of programs that we are looking at and are actually doing to break the cycle of crime. A couple of those that I'll actually talk about in a bit more detail, but one thing is around Job Club, GPS tracking, and some of the work that our probation staff have been given, the tools they've been given to actually address alcohol and drug treatment, alcohol and drug issues, sorry. Okay, so some highlights of working in a different way is Job Club, and I've got in one of those booklets there's an issue around Job Club. So what Job Club means is that offenders and our staff are working quite closely with Work and Income, so looking at CVs, looking at ways that we can encourage people to move from not only addressing their offending, but looking at education and how they can be trained, as well as employment. In Porirua, and that's in Wellington in New Zealand, we set up a Job Club in our community work centre, and 2 people received permanent employment from that, and that was an exciting thing for those offenders, because it's probably unlikely that they'll be returning to us, hopefully. Another thing that we're doing is that we all run community work centres, but we're looking at making those pathways to employment and training. So not only will they be completing hours also a portion of those hours will be converted to training and employment opportunities. There's a number of brief interventions that are being delivered by our probation staff, and I'll just quickly rush through those before I end. So one of them is offender manipulation and deception tools and exercises, and those tools assist staff to recognise and deal with particularly manipulative offenders. We have motivational interviewing and AOD brief interventions being delivered by our probation staff, and what that does is it motivates offenders to make the best use of specialised counselling programs, including tools to use with offenders to manage substance, alcohol abuse issues. We also have relapse prevention, so we're using a lot of motivational interviewing skills to produce an offence cycle and relapse prevention plan with offenders based on their risk scenarios. And we're doing a lot of work with gangs and building up pro-social support. Along with those brief interventions, we also have a number of tools that probation officers work with, and these are the cost-benefit analysis tool, a tombstone tool, and life compass tool. So we have a whole bag of things that our probation officer staff are equipped with to make sure that every interaction that they have is meaningful, and they use that as an opportunity to create lasting change. I also put on your desk a Better Public Services Hutt Valley initiative, and that actually what that does is looking at different ways that we can collaborate and work closely with other parts of the justice sector within New Zealand, and that's been filtered out right throughout New Zealand, so there's a number of initiatives that come from that. To date, we're measuring reducing reoffending, and we do that every month. We have a number of what we call dashboard charts that get sent out not only throughout the country in the probation setting, but also to our minister. So to date, as I said, we had to reduce reoffending by 25% by 2017. It's now 2013, and we've reduced reoffending by 10.8%. Thank you.